You've probably heard it before. Airline pilots don't really do much. And to be fair, from the outside, it does look a lot like we're just monitoring the autopilot and the coffee machine.
No threats, no errors. Suspicious? Maybe we've forgotten to cock something up?
But the cruise is where we earn our keep. Managing fuel, monitoring systems, prepping the arrival, and staying one step ahead of anything the aircraft or the world might throw at us. So, if you're expecting a 10-hour nap and a meal tray, stay tuned. Because what actually happens at flight level 350 might surprise you. Slightly. Alright, we're at cruise. Everything's calm, the aircraft's flying itself, and yet, oddly, they still pay us to sit here. In this episode, I'll show you why. This is the en route phase of flight, where we manage fuel, keep an eye on systems, review weather and airspace ahead, and make sure we're set up properly for the arrival. There's no checklist for watching Netflix up here. This is where staying ahead of the aircraft really matters. We'll also look at descent planning, star selection, and how we prepare the aircraft for approach while still hundreds of miles out. Welcome to day 3 of the A380 Type Rating Series. This is real airline flying based on real-world A380 procedures and designed for simmers, students, and fellow aviation nerds. I'm James, I'm a captain and instructor on the Airbus A380 and the A350, and I'll show you exactly how we manage this phase of flight. Autopilot engaged, brain not. Our last video ended just after we took off from LAX. If you're just joining us, you might want to check out day 1 and day 2, where I show you exactly how we got here. Before we can accelerate and head home, we need to clean up the aircraft, retract the flaps and slats. While they're vital for low-speed lift on takeoff, at this point they're mostly contributing drag. At heavy weights, our minimum airspeed will need to increase, taking us pretty close to the limiting speeds. So Airbus developed the auto retraction system, which retracts the flaps only passing 212 knots. The slats are left extended, raising the limiting speed from 222 knots to 263 without pilot input. This is useful as approaching max takeoff weight, green dot speed can be almost as much as 250 knots. Once we're above airspeed and the limiting speed has increased, we can select flap 0 and accelerate. Of course, we're not always blasting uphill. This aircraft is a heavyweight, and we don't always make altitude constraints easily. If we're struggling to meet a level on the SID, the FMS will flag it in amber. In that case, we might temporarily trade speed for altitude just like you would in a Cessna 172. And while the flap system may be automatic, monitoring isn't. We're still watching speed trends, checking for climb performance, and keeping a close eye on ECAM for any early signs of trouble. At around 10,000 feet, depending on company SOP, we'll turn off the landing lights and, turbulence permitting, turn off the seatbelt sign. The FMS now gives us a solid idea of our optimum cruising level, which is based on weight, temperature, cost index, and wind. Heavy, as we are out of LAX, we'll probably start at flight level 310, then step climb up gradually. The recommended max on the A380 is generally limited by engine power. If you're trying to plan when you're able to climb for traffic, it increases by 100 feet every 10 minutes or so. Generally, by the end of the flight, we'll end up at maybe flight level 400 or 410. The aircraft can do 430, but you'd have to be exceptionally light to get up there. So how much flying do we actually do in cruise? A common misconception is that the autopilot flies the plane and we're just there to look pretty and make announcements.
I know what?
Hello? This is your captain speaking. There is absolutely no cause for alarm.
Truth is, takeoffs are always manual, and the autopilot can only be engaged 5 seconds after liftoff. When we engage it depends on workload, weather, and preference. Sometimes immediately in busy airspace, sometimes much later for practice. Airlines usually have a maximum limit. Before entering RVSM airspace, which is flight level 290 and upwards, the autopilot must be on. Once we're level, let's say flight level 310 or 330, things settle down. From the outside, it might look like the aircraft's flying itself, but up front, they're still working. First, we check the systems. We'll cycle through electrical, hydraulics, air conditioning, and fuel, looking for anything unusual. The fuel and load page gives us an overview of how much spare fuel we have to play with, and we'll compare that against expected values from the flight plan. Meanwhile, in cruise, navigation is often done by airways. These days, it's all GPS and cost-driven routing, designed by dispatch to account for winds, temperature, turbulence, and even airspace fees. That said, we'll often deviate slightly from the original plan, whether it's for weather avoidance, traffic sequencing, or the occasional ATC shortcut. It's worth noting that not all cruise segments are created equal. Some, like North Atlantic crossings or polar routes, come with additional planning and procedural requirements, including ETOPS considerations, escape airports, and contingency fuel. I'll go into those in more detail in a future video. So yes, the workload is lower during cruise, but we're not asleep at the wheel. Relief crew members usually head off to the rest area after takeoff, and the cruise phase is split fairly to ensure everybody's back up front for the approach. Bunks vary by operator, and while I'm a reasonably average-sized 5'9", they're not exactly spacious. Definitely not for the claustrophobic. Back on the flight deck, we use this time to plan for worst-case scenarios. In mountainous areas, we prepare escape routes for rapid decompression. We review weather and NOTAMs for alternate airports. We also manage the human element, get to know our colleagues, trade stories, and occasionally deal with the wild card who thinks cat noises on guard frequency are hilarious. It's a people business too. Soft skills matter. Eventually, our attention shifts forwards, towards the arrival. We get the ATIS via data link or through the radio, which tells us the runway in use, surface winds, temperature, and QNH. That lets us select the star and the approach in the FMS, configure the arrival, and start building the descent profile. We'll confirm the route, verify altitude and speed constraints, and calculate our approach performance. Depending on runway length, wind, and braking action, we might opt for config 3 and idle reverse to save fuel and reduce noise. We don't always use full flaps and max reverse. All of this gets briefed among the crew, not just the raw data, but the mental model. Everyone needs to have the same picture in their head of how the approach will unfold. That way, if anything changes, we're already on the same page. And that's the en route phase. Maybe not as dramatic as takeoff or landing, but it's where good planning, vigilance, and clear communication pay off. Thanks for flying along. If you enjoyed this, give it a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss the rest of the series. In day 4, we'll go from cruise to concrete, covering descent, approach, and landing, the way it's actually done on the line.